prior to that, he was a Texas House representative. He has been a taxpayer champion for a number of years. I started trying to learn about property taxes about 3 years ago, and I remember he was on the committee, the first hearing that I ever attended, and I've learned a lot from him, and we appreciate his efforts. But he's here tonight to talk to us about the school safety plan. There was an interim charge hearing in the Senate just recently on that, and he's going to bring us up to date on how that all turned out. Please welcome Senator Hancock.
Thank you. This is quite the crowd. Y'all were a little raucous during the candidate time, so which I could have got up because I'm actually up this time and have an opponent that's working hard and knocking doors and doing that. So we're on the ballot as well and looking forward to November. So I enjoy campaigning, so that's always a good thing. We did have after the Santa Fe incident, the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor called for an interim committee into school safety, and typically it's the time when we normally get a break, Connie. So we were looking forward to kind of having summer off because we normally get summer off, and it didn't work out that way after Santa Fe. So I was fortunate enough to serve on that committee based on really my background. I'd spent 13 years on the school board prior to joining the legislature. And so the Lieutenant Governor asked me if I'd serve on that because of the background there. I said I was glad to. I'm going to go over the charges real quick, and then what I want to do is kind of tell you what the charges were, kind of tell you some of the things we learned through hours and hours and hours of testimony. We had 4 different hearings, 2 in June, 2 in July, and then share with you a little bit of what the takeaways that we're going to be moving forward with as the session starts. And I'm not going to read them out completely. I'm just kind of give you the general idea. So the very first charge was to improve the infrastructure and design of our schools. So you heard the Lieutenant Governor talk about this a little bit, and basically what we're looking at trying to do is harden our schools, and I'll explain why and what we learned in that regard. And then it had us look at training programs. What training programs are available? What are we doing about training for these type of events, mass shootings that take place in these areas? So that was the other one. Then the third one was looking at kind of the root cause. What's causing these situations to play out within such consistency, unfortunately, in the areas. And then looking at our current laws and our current status regarding protective orders and what the protective orders allow us to do. And this is kind of the one that brought up the red flag issues, and I'll explain what we found out on there. So I'm going to take those kind of a step by step. And then I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for Chris, because you're going to enjoy him. And I know most of you came to see him. I'm just kind of the filler, you know. You know that. Although I will, that rock group that you go to see, and the before band. I'm the before band that you've never heard of, and so that would be me. Improving the infrastructure. So one of the things we found out, and each one of these hearings lasted several hours. We typically start at 9 o'clock, finish around 5 o'clock, and 4 different times. So do your math real quick and you'll figure out that. But on each issue, and we just took them all separately. What we found out, which we know, is many of our school districts have adopted gun-free zones. Well, it became very evident that what we've done is created soft targets around our schools, both through design, right, and this open concept design, but also through advertising that you don't have to worry about being shot here because nobody's going to carry a gun on these premises. And so we've created soft targets, and one of the things we've got to look at is kind of look at school in a different direction and look at ways that we can harden these targets, whether that be through cameras and technology, whether that be through entrance, egress, and how many entrances we're going to have, and other areas as well. And so not really a surprise. I don't think any of the things we found out were a surprise. It was interesting to hear people just flat out and say, these typically happen in schools or similar areas because they're soft targets. And it just makes sense, right? I've never been one to think that somebody that was coming to kill a bunch of people would read a sign and stop and say, oh, I can't do that here. That's not going to stop them. Training programs. One of the things that we looked at training programs, and one that's gotten a lot of publicity, is a school marshal program, which I carried that legislation in the Senate. It provides 80 hours training for those that want to carry a lot of protection. Lupe would not qualify for this because you have to protect your gun and not lose it. And it's got to be in a secure place. So she would not be a candidate. It is purely volunteer, and what we're seeing in the state of Texas in that regard is that program's been in existence for roughly 5 years. But in the last 6 months, we've seen more people participate in that program, sign up for that program in the last 6 months than we had in the previous 5 years. So it was something that we passed it. We thought it was a good program based on experience. We really worked with school districts. We worked with law enforcement. They received the same training that law enforcement would receive in that training, and they have to have refresher courses. The campus would decide who's going to be doing it, so completely voluntary, regardless of what you hear out there. And obviously, it just didn't catch on. Well, after Santa Fe, guess what? Now it's catching on, especially in our rural areas. And so we're seeing the rural areas really come out on doing this. And the reason that's so important, and the reason that I really felt like we needed to implement something like this, and we're also looking at all kinds of other trainings in that regard, is a couple of things that we found out in these testimonies is on average 9 people are killed per minute. Take that in a little bit. For those that want to not have anybody available locally or on campus, 9 people are killed per minute in these events. These events typically last 3 to 4 minutes. So by the time law enforcement's able to respond, lives are taken. Which is why we feel like a program like this, where you can respond immediately, you can respond within seconds. When 9 people are killed per minute, you know that seconds matter and seconds can save a life. And what we've seen, the consistent thing we've seen in all these areas is the people that stop the bad people that have a gun are good people with a gun as well. And so the faster we can get them to respond. That was the intent on the school marshal bill, and that was so that you had some, literally, you look at some of these campuses, it can take you 30 seconds to walk from one wing of Birdville High School to the next wing of Birdville High School. 30 seconds, and 9 per minute. Versus law enforcement, even if an SRO's officer is there, a student resource officer is on hand, backup being present, working with that officer is not a bad idea as well, so that they have more than one person to worry about. So we looked at that as well, training programs on doing that. We looked at the root cause. One of the interesting things was, and I'm just a very little guy and kind of a fact-based guy, so one of our third hearing was on mental health, so it was a mental health hearing. Well, in our first panel, the very first thing they told us was, these people are not mental health issues. And I thought, okay, well, can I go home? Because we're dealing with emotional health. Now think about that for a little bit. With these individuals, because you hear a lot about the mental health, and what they told us, these are not mental health people that can be diagnosed, treated, and cured. They're not mental health people that can be given a prescription and all of a sudden they're cured. These are emotional health issues. In fact, the basic criteria for who carries out these acts are white males that are misogynist. In other words, we have youth, and go figure this, youth in these days that don't know how to treat women. We have youth in these days, one of the things that came out in the testimony is in Santa Fe, in June, wearing a long jacket covering up the weapons. But they didn't want to offend, right, so nobody bothered him, even though he's using these long jackets in June. And I don't know about y'all, the last thing I want to see, June, July, or August in Texas is a jacket. And so they walk into schools with these jackets on, and we're not worried about it. So, I mean, think about that a little bit. It's not a mental health issue, according to the experts that testified. It's an emotional health issue. And one thing we know about these young men is it is consistently young white males doing it, and they're misogynistic. I mean, they just came out and told us that. And so one of the things we're looking at, and one of the things when I was on school board that we adopted in Vertical was character education. So when you're teaching curriculum, that you have to write character education. And of course, yeah, we had arguments about, well, whose character? Well, there's certain character traits that we can all agree to. You know, you should not lie, you should love one another, basic truths that we go by. And so these are some of the things that would have probably more of an impact than the mental health issues when they tell you these aren't people you can cure with a pill. They've got emotional issues, typically something happened that flipped them out emotionally, and they just reacted and responded. On doing that. Protective order laws, the red flag laws, in looking at that, it became very clear very quickly on that we have existing laws that if there are people that you feel in danger of and you present that in a court, you present that to a judge, that there are ample ways within the state, within current law, to restrict individuals that may be a harm to themselves or harm to somebody else in dealing with that without adding any other piece, in fact, without adding any other pieces of legislation on there. It became very clear. Now, maybe educating people on that is something we need to do, but we kind of walked away saying that we felt like the laws that are on the books were significant, that they were ample to take care of these issues. So it was really interesting on doing that. We've filed our report. We'll kind of see what we're going to move forward in that. One of the things we're looking at, one of the things we heard back on the school marshal bill, was that they had to pay for that cost, and it was done, the local districts, so the state's looking at that. I don't know if you saw that a couple of the schools, I think there's 4 different school districts, that the governor out of his funds actually paid for those school districts to enroll their personnel into the school marshal program. So we're kind of looking at that and seeing what areas we're doing. But the reality of the situation is existing laws pretty much cover where we're at. We just live in a society where there's evil that abounds. And that was the other thing that came out in testimony. Until we change people's hearts, evil abounds. And that's the world we live in. So I appreciate y'all giving me the opportunity to go down there and serve. I love what I'm doing. I've been very, very busy. In fact, currently serve on 12 committees and chair or co-chair 4 of those. And so we're down there quite a bit. Like I said, I thought I was going to get a break in June and July, but this came up, and it was obviously a very, very important committee for the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor as well. And I think we learned some good things on it. Things that, as I shared with you, you kind of go, well, yeah, that makes sense. But to stop, have those committee, have those hearings, have people come forward, and hearing those things, I think really was good to have this interim study before we go into session and address this type of issues, so that we're not reacting in an emotional way, we're operating with facts and data. Thank you.